Nobody, like I have a box of t-shirts and no one gets a t-shirt every time. Did anybody at least open it up? Like, did you go to it? All right, thank you, Nathan. You did? Okay, good.
I got the regions and I got the
You couldn't make them in the right shapes? So did you get to a world where you have like all the colors like going from left to right? Like it goes like blue across? Yep.
Here and here and here.
Yeah, so maybe we'll talk about that offline. Okay, so I'm going to step away. We have two lovely ladies. Layla is going to come up first and give her presentation. Hang on, let me close this stuff for you. And also kind of admin tip. So A, if you want to know the Workout Wednesday solution, it's already up there. Andy and Emma have them, but I have them on my Tableau Public as well. You can Google Ann Jackson Tableau Public. The deck for this and any corresponding stuff is always going to be available on all of our channels. Usually LinkedIn is first, or our community forum. And I will post this. I think this is you. You. Okay. You. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so she quietly whispered to me to talk loud, so I will warn you if you don't know me. My voice doesn't carry very well, so I'm going to do my best, but if you're really, really interested in table calculation magic, you might want to come a little closer.
This is the woman who named her presentation One Table Calc to Rule Them All.
And I did my best to not mix sci-fi metaphors too much, but oh, that's not good. How do I take it off? Oh, never mind. You get it?
Yeah.
Okay, so Layla Manheim. So I have up here also. Let's see. Okay, so this doesn't show it, but the second one is obviously my Twitter. If you have questions after this. So I currently work in the business analytics department for Cox Automotive, but I started Tableau about 2 years ago. Gradually got to use Tableau more and more of my day. But table calculations were always like, it seemed like if I could figure out table calculations, I could call myself like a Tableau expert, right? So when I started out, and I would see these phrases, it would cause, let's say, like a lot of talking and of various conversations with my computer. Maybe 6 or 7 months ago, a colleague of mine who used to work at Tableau used the index and size calculations to kind of explain to me how Tableau renders data and how it aggregates data. And this basically like changed my life. Like I feel like it almost it's like before knowing all that and after knowing all that. So I will show you kind of how I use index to figure out how to set the parameters in table calculations when things are not quite as kind of more complex, and when it's not quite as easy as or Tableau doesn't figure it out at the first try. But first I'm gonna just kind of explain a little bit of how Tableau kind of aggregates data. So I'm assuming you have experienced some frustration with the table calculation, but here we go. So basically the differences between underlying data and your aggregated data. So let's look at sales by region from our favorite data set. So this is what the underlying data looks like, right? So anytime you have any worksheet with this, you can, click to view the data, and if you click the underlying data tab, that's what you see. So this is like what your data actually looks like wherever it is sitting. So if we are looking at, the sales per product category, per region, or if we're looking at sales per region, we have all these individual lines for, say, the West, right? So, in the aggregated data, it's basically one of these rows can be 100 rows of actual orders or order items in the data. So for the programmers out there, one way to think about it is, so what Tableau right now sees, it doesn't matter how many rows you actually have in your data. It's seeing basically a data set with 4 rows or 4 vectors of 1 element each. So you see over here, the furnishings with that is like the sales is the 1 element, right? So if you have a slightly more complex crosstab where you're also bringing in some columns for the regions, now you have 4 vectors of 4 elements each, and so that furnishings one now has basically an element of the sales for each of the regions. Does that make sense? So what Tableau is doing is in each one of those cells, right, it's aggregating or summing up that data. But for table calculations, we want to look at basically values in multiple rows and maybe columns. So as an example of percent of total, so if you were going to calculate percent of total with no Tableau and no computer help, I don't know why you would ever do that, but so you would take, say, if you want to know how the sales for chairs, what percent of total orders that is, you would take that 328,000 and then you would divide it by all those other 4 numbers together, right? So basically the calculation for that table calc is sum of sales for the chairs divided by total sum of sales for all those rows. So what we can do is use the index calculation, which is basically like the row counter calculation. So how many of you guys have used index? Okay, good enough. So you're basically using that to see how Tableau, basically how it counts each row and when it's going to restart counting. And so in this example, you would say, okay, well, I needed to, like the window, which is the total number of rows I wanted to go through before it stops that count. I want that to be basically 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm just going to demo this to you on the workbook that I made. So a second. Okay, now I can use my mouse to point. So if this was your crosstab, right? So instead of bringing in sales, now we're just going to do is put index on the text. Right? Index, and I'm just going to put the text. So in that case, Tableau figured out how to count it. But if you go in here to edit table calculation, you will see that table down, because we just have one dimension and no columns, you see that it's kind of like checking off this subcategory here. So it's basically the same as doing this and specifying whatever dimension is in your row. So what I did is I styled it a little more obviously here, so you could see where the 1 is and how much is coming. So this is the same exact thing. It's using index and it's using table down. So in here, what I did is just changed it so that same dimension is going across, and then you could see in here the table across. That's how it's breaking out. So it's a little easier to see using this. So Now we're doing table across with 2 dimensions, right? So it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's just going to repeat that going across every time. If I was going to change it, if I wanted to instead look at what is the percent of sales that each subcategory contributes to the central region and the east region, I can go table down. And here. So then you see it's counting down, repeating this way. So size, by the way, is just going to tell you how many items are in each one of your kind of table calculation windows. So if I did size here and I set it to the same computing, it would say 4 for each of these. So what I did is I just created a handy little reference dashboard. So this is an example of what would happen if you did compute with and then chose cell. So obviously it's not helping us answer many business questions, right, to repeat one, but I'm sure you can imagine this could be helpful in some of the like crazy formatting or some of those workout Wednesdays. And then this are just some examples of when you have when you're adding actually 2 dimensions. So now that what you have in that first column is really considered your pane. So looking pane across, it's gonna keep counting until it gets to the end of the pane, and then it'll restart again, and you can see pane down going again in that up, just finishing just within each pane, but counting the other direction. So I just have a couple other ones. So I will post this to Tableau Public, and you can feel. So I still learn a lot, but just kind of messing around and trying different things. Actually, use this to figure out how like the lookup and the first and last works. So I do have a demo, kind of example to show you of how you might use this in a more complex example. So say you have to look at sales trends, and you have some profitable and some money losers, right? So what I did was, okay, I thought it would be cool to look at how the quantity of orders has changed over time for profitable and unprofitable. So maybe Bookcases has increased in orders over the years, but we're actually doing more unprofitable orders. So to do that, to kind of, if I have no idea how to set the compute with, right, I would first, so what I did there in the other one was actually use a moving average. So if I was to do that here, moving average, and then if I want to look at, say, a 6-month rolling average, right? So change that to 6. So I think that Tableau is doing it right, but let's just check. So I'm going to type in index again. Of course, it's a lot of numbers, so let's look at one. So right now it looks like it is counting it right how I want it to. So it's going from beginning to end, and then it's restarting it for that second one, and so it's restarting it for each profitability category and each product subcategory. But I want to figure out if I say wanted to actually go in here and adjust this, I don't know if I need to go back 6 months or 7 months or kind of how far back it is. What I can actually do is set it up to how to see kind of what is -6 back, right? So you take index and go -1. And then I didn't really change, so what I need to do is actually change how the index is sorting, basically. So I'm going to go in here and I'm actually going to choose specific dimension. And I'm going to bring the month, and you could basically play around with it a little to see, to figure it out. But I have used this trick a lot, so we'll say I've gotten pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to restart every subcategory. And because it's deepest, it's using month of order date as the deepest level. And then I'm going to set the dimension on custom. I'm going to use order date. And then I'm just going to use maximum and descending. And actually, if I really, really wanted it to show negative, I'd go like that. So now I could basically go and check and say, okay, what is this really the 6 months back that I, or the, you know, the period of however many periods I want to look back. So basically, if Tableau hadn't set the parameters right, what I would now know is how to set the parameters. Like these, I wouldn't do the custom sort, obviously, but I would know kind of what to set as the restarting every, etc. And then I would go into my actual table calculation and set those parameters that way. And of course, take you back to that. That's pretty much how I use that trick. Now Tableau did, I noticed, I think in one of the last updates, it did add, where is it? Just show calculation assistance. And so it does add some of that for you, but can't go in reverse yet, so maybe that's an idea. But anyways, I think it's a really good way to understand kind of how that compute with is actually working and how to fix it when it's sometimes not working quite like how you expect it to. Any questions? Yes.
So for the dialog that you just had open where you selected the specific dimensions, what rule of thumb do you use to figure out what order the fields need to be in? Because even today, even I still like struggle with that, and it's just kind of trial and error until it like looks right. So what?
And I feel like it's maybe a little tougher sometimes to understand. Like that was one thing that was a little easier with the old dialog box, because you could choose which ones to include.
Right, to bring over the right panel.
Yeah. So I try to do it by most to least detail.
Okay.
But that doesn't always work, which is the times when I do end up still using that index trick, and I just kind of see how it changes things.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
So Layla showed me that one weekend we were getting coffee, and it's really revolutionary. Just from the sake of what she said at the end there, is you can validate what you're doing. That's really powerful to know that you're doing the math right. So that's my takeaway from this. She's right, the assistance is there, but that gives you like a pure, warm and fuzzy. So if you didn't see how revolutionary it was, go home and do something, and then you will use it one time and thank her for days on it. All right, so Ariel, you're up. We're gonna do some techno changes here, and she's got her fancy math. All right. What did we decide on this with the black dongle? All right. It's on the right. On the left. Yeah.
and I'm gonna have to work to speak up too, so can you hear me okay? Okay. So of you out there, a lot of the people that I've met so far in the user group, a lot of people are working for corporate settings. Is that, how many of you does that? Anyone in government? A few? Okay. And anybody freelance, small company, boutique analytics? Okay, so I'm the outlier here. And I'm going to give you a kind of a behind-the-scenes peek at a project that my business partner and I did this winter with Mesa Fire and Medical Department. So there's going to be two things here. You're going to get a look at what the technical part was, but you're also going to get a kind of behind-the-scenes look of an independent company going out small, doing a project with a government entity. So I hope that's of you. Does that sound interesting? Do you want more of the workbook stuff, or do you want some of the behind the scenes, how does this work to go out and do a consulting gig? Both? Okay. All right, so I'm Ariel Strong, and as I mentioned, it was Mesa Fire and Medical Department, and we ended up doing a fall injury prevention project with them. That wasn't what we started out to do, however. And to give you a little background from where I'm coming from, I actually started out as an artist, became a software developer in the early 90s, and went on to do software development at NAU, at which point I burned out. And I went from the frying pan into the fire, literally. I became a wildland firefighter, EMT, with a small rural department, and enjoyed that a lot, but eventually that kind of stuff takes a toll on you, physically, mentally, and I got back into software development. So I became a full-stack web developer. The internet had advanced a lot in the time between the mid-90s and the mid-2000s, and I came back doing web development, discovered Tableau, and the little artist in me went, yay, this is cool stuff. So I was especially happy when we had the opportunity to do a project with the fire department, because this was like right up my alley. I speak that language. So I'm going to give you a little overview of the participants, the purpose of the project, and then the actual process we went through. So the company was informatics. It was just two of us at that point, and my business partner, business side, I was more on the technical side. And then we had the Mesa Fire personnel, and this was actually one of the battalion chiefs. You would consider the product owner at this point. He was driving the effort, contacted us, wanted a data project. And, but the people that I worked with the most on this were the fire prevention and life safety educators, and we had some help from the City of Mesa IT staff. The purpose of the project, as I said, the battalion chief wanted to get more data-driven work going on in the department, particularly around some of their grants. Government at this point, you know, you've got to justify every dollar that you spend. He's very aware of that and is concerned about, you know, where are the cuts going to come, because they're going to come. And he wanted to show the value of what the fire prevention and life safety personnel do, both in terms of the mission of the fire department, but if he could also show cost savings, service improvements. So that was where we were looking. The initial idea was to do a drowning prevention campaign, and that has a lot of emotional appeal, and it's something that the public's pretty aware of. But this turned in meetings with the whole group. One of the interesting things about this was that we had a lot of meetings up front where everybody got in the room together and talked about what are we trying to accomplish, what can data do for us. They didn't exactly know, a clear idea of what they could accomplish. So there was a lot of explaining and exploration that went on, and this sort of one overriding idea. But it became apparent that that was not going to be what really met other goals that they had. So we ended up reframing it, looking at where the greatest need in the community was and where the greatest potential savings were. And looking at exploring the data at first, it became really evident that falls are a huge problem in Mesa. It's an older population. It's the kind of thing that is really, they could find cost savings, and it's a huge quality of life issue for many people in the community. The interesting thing was Fire Prevention and Life Safety Department, that group has already been doing falls. It was almost like they were already doing a lot of efforts in the community, but it was like they were so close to it they didn't see what they had, and they didn't understand the value of the data that they had. So that's where we came in. This is out of the workbook that you'll see in more detail, but it's just a brief look at projections of costs in lives, costs in dollars over the next about 10 to 15 years. So we're looking at 2015 data. You're just under nationally in the U.S. About 35 billion a year due to costs for fall injuries. By 2030, that's projected to be 100 billion. So it's a big. They're looking at a time where they're going to have cost cuts, most likely. They're going to have a greater need. So, and the cost in lives is pretty. It's not something that most people think about, right? You get 30,000 deaths related to fall injuries in the country per year, and that is looked with that increase in an older population by 2030, about 100,000. And CDC data says that up to about approximately 25% of fall injury deaths are preventable. So this was an area where they could really bend the curve. If they could find a way to do that and use their existing efforts, they could really make a difference. So the project plan, we decided to do a historical analysis of their data to establish a baseline of what they'd already accomplished in the community with their fall injury education. And they'd also had some partnerships like with Home Depot in installing like bars in the shower and no slip mats and things like that. Then an individual community analysis where they would pick 2 of the retirement communities, so they had a small area that they could reach all the people in one particular area and track and determine the actual needs. Research project design and survey instrument along with that, coming out of those analyses to devise that. And they are currently in the education and fall prevention study. They're currently in the middle of this right now. They're going out and doing the surveys, collecting information, going door to door in these 2 different retirement communities. And then when that's done, we'll analyze the results. So if you want to follow along with what I'm going to do next here, you can go to Tableau Public, or you can go to my website and just click on the link there if you don't want to try to type all that out. And I'm going to switch over here. So the initial the initial historical analysis, and that's most of what I'm going to show is that one because it is open government data. It's on the web. You can access this. I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. The community project, the community analysis was using data from the IT department, Mesa's IT, all the call data, very specific stuff, a lot of privacy issues, HIPAA-related stuff because of actual incident reports and things that I used for that particular one. So we won't be looking at that other than a couple of screenshots. But the data I used was January through August 2016 because that was all of the open data they had online. They've since added a lot more. So if you go to, if you just do Open Data Mesa, you'll come to their portal. And the data that I actually used here, they've now got this up to over 250,000 rows of incident data. It was about 50,000 when I first used this. I pulled. You can actually go there and download this and play with the data yourself. I do a lot of Python scripting, so I pulled down their existing at January through August, and I formatted, I went ahead and did the zip codes and everything because they just have the street addresses, but no zip codes. So I needed that for the analysis I was going to do. But I'd encourage you to go out and look at this data. It's pretty cool to actually go in there and use real life stuff. They've got, besides police and fire, they've got, and the medical, they've got lots of other stuff about Mesa in general, which is some pretty interesting stuff to play with. So I took that data, extracted out all the fall injury stuff, and formatted it. And oops, come on here. This may take a second. Okay, and then just kind of sorted out the different calls. So ALS is advanced life support. That's like when you've got at least one paramedic. It's usually one paramedic and one EMT. BLS is basic life support, and that is usually just EMTs. You don't have a paramedic on board. And they also, the fire department also responds to lift assists. So someone who's older or someone who's disabled, they fall or slip, they just, maybe they slide off the couch and they can't get back up. So those were also included in that data, and I sorted those out. And you can see by the months. And then they had some ideas of what they thought they would see in this data, and they were partly right and partly wrong. When we actually got in there and looked at it, they expected a fall, a tail off over into the summer as a lot of people tend to leave town. And you can see that in the ALS data. The more severe calls actually do go down. What we saw, and something that they're looking into because of seeing it here, BLS data the BLS number of calls went up, and they're not sure why that is. So that's something. This is one of the fun things about doing this, is you start to find things that you don't expect and your client doesn't necessarily expect, and it brings up questions for follow-up. Then by zip code, you can see certain areas of Mesa there's a higher volume, and some of that's population, but a lot of it is there are certain concentrations in the town, and they know their area really well. They also know which stations tend to get the most calls of certain types, and we overlaid that with, you can see the older population, the darker blue there. You can see in this area, and then over here, this is one of the communities they selected to actually do the research project in on Dobson, because there's a very small community. It's all one address essentially, one street address, and they have relationships with people that run the retirement communities. So they felt like they would get good results in actually contacting people. My bad, pie chart. Okay, just to put in, so they could see what their volume of fall injury calls are compared to nationwide. They have a smaller amount, which wasn't, again, something we didn't expect given the higher number of older people in Mesa. We're not sure what that means exactly, and maybe their fall injury prevention program is good, or there's some other thing. We're not real sure what that is, but just some more of what's there. You've already seen this. And then the conclusion of the historical thing was to pull out where they could find cost savings based on the general thing. So here, and sorry for the small type, but an average ambulance charge based on Arizona State DHS data and Mesa's data for their ambulances is about $880. So if you multiply that by the number of those calls, the falls calls, that gets really expensive really fast. And that's just the dollar and cents. That's not counting the, pain, suffering, death, all the other things that are associated with severe falls. If you take that 25% CDC number of bending that curve, if we apply a 10% reduction over time through education and mitigation efforts, partnerships in the community, and you can look at the details of the, how I figured out adjustments for non-transport calls and some other stuff. But we came up with a figure of $3.25 million over the course of a year. If they could bend that curve cut the number by 10%, that's significant. So that's a goal that they're working towards, and that's taking their expertise already. They've had some grants for fall injury programs, and they're using a very specific program along with the survey and community education component that we worked on as a team, and coupled that with the community analysis, the two different retirement communities. This gets into where their internal data. So I've just got a couple screenshots, and then we'll wrap it up. The time period is a little bit different, but this gave me some more detailed data to dig into. And get into specifics with the populations that they're actually working with right now in the research study. So there are the two communities, and then how many units are in each of those, and their location. And then here was another surprise we ran into. This was one of those things where you scratch your head and you go, what's happening here? On the one side, we've got the Greenfield community, and then on the other, the Dobson community. The Dobson community tends to be a little older, and I won't go into all I broke all that down on some of the other ones, and the Greenfield community tends to be a little younger, slightly. And there's this spike in that 65 to 69-year-old age range. There's a huge number of events. There's like, what is going on there? So in looking at the calls, the types of calls, and then talking to them with what their knowledge of that particular station that runs on those calls and what they encounter with that, their working hypothesis right now is that younger group, there's a point in there between 60 and 70 where people have to kind of come to grips with their limitations as they age. And what they've seen, the engines that run in there, the ambulances that run in there, they've seen, and I don't have the by gender on here, but it was 3/4 of those calls were men rather than women. They said it was guys getting up on ladders to put up Christmas lights, trimming trees, doing things like that. They felt that, and this is where data tells a story, right? There's that age range right there, and based on the calls that they had run on, that's their working hypothesis, is that there's that point where reality starts to sink in, and some of these people were finding that reality by falling. So, yeah, it's so, and they'll dig into that deeper. So they came away from these things having data to go, okay, we need to look more here, we need to look more there, and test these things. So that was kind of a fun process, having been on both sides of this, having run on calls when I was a firefighter and EMT, and knowing those stories and the kinds of things people tell you about, well, how did this happen to you? You know, you take all that information, and you have this sort of anecdotal evidence, but then when you start digging into the data, you start to see, you start weighing those things. So thanks for your attention. I also want to thank Ann and Michael for all their work in helping us learn more, do more, be more. And so you can find this historical analysis on Tableau Public. And please, if you want to questions, anything, it's been an interesting thing working with a government entity rather than a private business. The time it takes to do things, the different layers, all the different stakeholders you have to work with, that's been a really interesting thing with it. And be happy to answer any questions. And you can contact me. I'm going to compile this into a PDF, and these are all linked, so you can just click on links. You don't have to do anything there. So I'll talk to, I guess, Anna, do we have anywhere where we put PDFs? Or
we
do.
Okay. We can put it on so Tableau has a community forum. If you just Google Phoenix Tableau user group, you'll get to that, and then we'll probably also throw it through LinkedIn, I think is what we can do.
Okay. Anybody have questions or?
I want to clap.
I can